Welcome to Environmental Everything. Today, we're going to talk about mold myths.
You know what? I'm really excited to talk about this one. Do you know why?
No, why?
I know a lot about mold. I find most people don't know a lot about mold. And you know what that means?
What does that mean?
There's a lot of disinformation out there. There's a lot of mold myths out there. Black mold, toxic mold. People blame a lot of health concerns on mold, but in reality, it's not always mold that's actually the cause of the problem, you know? Do you know how mold actually came into our lexicon, like how it became popular?
No. Please tell me. I'm so excited.
I will tell you. It was actually two sites where it really kind of came up. It came up at a property down in Texas where there was a water leak that was kind of undetected, and it permeated the house, and the people became sick. There was issues with a claim with the insurance company, and it made the newspapers, it made the national press. And when they opened up walls and such, they found this mold, and it was dark in color, and people called it black mold. And it came into the lexicon, quite frankly. And there was also a similar case in Washington, D.C., where there was a row house or a townhouse, and there's a shared wall in between. Water was getting in between the wall and going down into the ground, but it was touching sheetrock and such, and it was causing mold growth in the wall cavity. People were getting sick, and they opened up the wall, and again, it was a dark-colored mold, and they called it black mold. And ever since then, the news, and also molds produce things they produce mycotoxins, but the media kind of dumbed it down and said, oh, that black mold, black toxic mold, right? But in reality, you probably never heard of any other mold named after a color. And you would think with the thousands of different types of molds out there, you would hear about the gray mold or the white mold, and you don't.
No.
The black mold is just kind of really stuck. Some people contribute it to like a type of mold called Stachybotrys, but that's actually a greenish mold, has some black to it. But the whole idea of signifying or naming a mold after color really doesn't exist. It's mostly all Latin names, very hard to pronounce. Penicillium aspergillus, Chitonium. One of the easiest molds for people to pronounce is actually called schmutz. But the myth of like black mold is so ingrained in people because we're actually consultants on mold. People call us and people are like, is that the black mold? And I'm like, it's black in color, but that mold over there is gray. I said, which one do you think is going to hurt you? And people like the black one. I said, probably the gray one more so. It's like, why? I'm like, well, there's more of it. You just don't see it. The black, it just tends to stand out against something. But people have this myth that it is black mold, and I teach classes and I tell people it's not black mold, and I will show them hundreds of different types of molds that are named. They're names, right? None of them will have a color. They can't pronounce them, and they're all like, still being like, what about black mold? Like, you just can't change people's mindsets regarding it. And when people say the toxic mold, there's no mold called toxic molds. It's mold. Mold is present because it needs moisture. Okay, and if you have mold in your home, it signifies that you have a moisture problem. Okay, and I say moisture because I'm not saying it's a water leak or a flood, something along those lines. You have mold in your bathroom because you use the shower and you don't use the exhaust fan. It stays moist for a period of time and you get mold growth, and that similar type process occurs in attics, even without a roof leak, through condensation, happens in crawl spaces, basements. A leak under a sink, when you're using the sink, that can cause mold. That's an intermittent, leak, but it's not really like a flood or a hurricane or something along those lines, right? But, people don't really associate, water being the cause of mold, but a water issue has a byproduct and it's called mold. Do you know the differences between mold and mildew?
I do, but our listeners might not. So why don't you tell them?
What sounds better?
Mildew?
Mildew sounds better. Has more letters to it. It's not a 4-letter word.
Right.
They're both fungi. It's pretty much the same. fun. Well, you know why mold is. Do you know why mold is fun to have around?
No, why?
Because it's a fungi.
Oh, it's so funny.
I know, it's a dad joke. It is such a dad joke, right? So when people think about mold and they want to, is that mildew? It's pretty much the same thing. It's a byproduct of some water issue. To manage any kind of mold issue is really trying to address the moisture issue. I've seen a lot of properties where they've had a mold issue. They remediated by some company, and the mold came back because they never stopped the water. It's almost like if you use your bathroom and mold grows there and you clean it, and you do not start using the exhaust fan, or the exhaust fan is not powerful enough, you're going to get mold. It's going to come back. But that's easier for people to see and kind of live with. I typically actually write off most mold that I see in people's bathrooms because it's its own little ecosystem.
That's another mold myth.
It is a mold myth, yeah. And quite frankly, you're like, I got mold growing on the caulk, right? And it's supposed to be antimicrobial, And the funny thing was, if you were to look under that caulk that has black staining on it under a microscope, from a distance it looks like it's super smooth, like a skating rink, right? But in reality, under a microscope, it's like the surface of the moon. There's all these little, divots, openings in there where biological matter, organic matter can get in there, mold will grow, and it stains it, right? So even if you try to kill it with something, a fungicide, and even if you try to use a bleach or something, that staining can still remain because it's a stain. Like you've killed it, but it's still there, So, Tiffany, you deal with, actually, Tiffany does a lot of mold inspections herself. Her life is kind of boring.
Not always.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
What do you find that people have misconceptions about regarding mold?
I think a lot of times they just think that mold's everywhere. They think if they find a little bit of mold on, like, let's say, I don't know, on like an exterior wall or something, or in the basement, that mold's like all over the house and they need to test every room and it's just everywhere in the house.
I would agree with you. That is really common. We deal with a lot of inspections for people who live in a home, also people buying and selling. And people are concerned that if they find it in one area, they find it's going to be somewhere else. But there's a thing called like an ecosystem. Like, you don't have alligators, gators, like, in Maryland. You have them in Florida, because that's their ecosystem where they live. When you do find mold growing somewhere, it's because that area is conducive to that type of mold. And what some molds will do is they'll start to grow and they'll emit compounds that will stifle other types of mold to grow because they want to be the dominant mold growth. Okay? So if you have an area, say say your bathroom is coated in mold, chances are the hallway to the bathroom does not have mold on it. Right? Because the ecosystem in the bathroom is completely different from there. So the same thing goes with like a basement or a crawl space, just what you're saying. They find it in the basement and they think it's throughout the house. In reality, it isn't. But you brought up a good myth, right? People will tell you mold is everywhere. And it is. I've sampled thousands of sites, okay? Air samples. I've never taken an air sample anywhere, and I'm talking in an operating room, a restaurant, an office, a hotel, wherever. Outside, there's always mold. It's never zero, right? So when people tell you there's mold is everywhere, it's meant to be outside. It's meant to break down the leaves, the grass clippings, the mulch. It's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. Now, you might work in the yard and you come inside, you're bringing mold spores with you. If your house is not overly damp, those mold spores aren't really going to do anything. They're just going to be kind of a background. I have people who, someone's buying a house and they find mold and the seller's like, well, mold's everywhere. And it's like, well, mold's everywhere outside. But, if you have large colonies of mold growth inside, which you're determined visually and from testing, you're going to be like, well, there's a problem here that you have a water problem that causes mold. And that's a common theme that we find with people. That they are unaware that can be really self-contained. Like, I've done attics where it's just a very small, like between two rafters, that has mold growth because someone took an exhaust fan from the bathroom, and God bless them, they used the exhaust fan, but the exhaust didn't go outside. It went up to the attic, and there's mold growth just along there. Okay. Now these are attics where they don't really have a lot of cross ventilation. So a lot of times when I go into an attic, it's unfinished. In the summertime, I feel hot air blowing across me. It's both refreshing and stifling, right? In this scenario, there was no cross ventilation, so there's really no air to spread the spores somewhere else or spread the moisture anywhere else, so it's contained. So I use that example that if you have, say, mold, and here's a common area, okay? You're in a basement, you have a sub pump, there's water in it, you have no lid. Water evaporates, mold grows above the ceiling there. It's not going to grow 10 feet away. Why not? Totally different environment. And you see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, all the time.
All the time, yeah. And most of the time, as a matter of fact, we were just giving a class on mold, and I had someone in who they flip homes, and they buy bank-owned properties, and they said, "Do you ever hear about the Coca-Cola trick?"
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, I did not like that guy.
No.
The guy basically said, you take Coca-Cola, you shake it up, and you spray it on the ceiling, and you tell the people there's mold. Because it dries to be a dark color and staining.
Yeah, that way they can get the house for a lesser price.
Yeah, and that's what this person was leading to. And I'm like, I've never, ever heard someone say that. Because I always tell people, if you think something's mold, take your finger and rub it. If it comes off, it's a sign that it's probably mold.
Yeah. I wouldn't want him as my realtor.
I would not want, yes, I would not want to buy it, yes, completely, But it's, a lot of times in our industry, if someone says something's mold, you either assume that it is, and if you want to know 100%, you just wind up testing it, But you actually kind of backtrace and find out what the cause was, because people freak out about mold, and it is, just so you know, it is a biological hazard, and it's an irritant. It's like a pollen. You inhale it, your body has an autoimmune reaction to the spores, you don't feel good. When you have active mold growing, it produces compounds. Mold is growing, it's consuming, it's burping, it's farting, it's off-gassing. You can consume that and your body has a reaction to it, And one of the issues, and I'm not going to say this is a myth, but I deal with people buying and selling, and someone is living in a house and the buyer finds mold. And the seller's like, I know you're concerned about your family. I have a family too. They're not getting sick from it, right? And I'm like, well, my family has allergies. My family, is not like your family. They're different. And I'm like, some people have peanut allergies. Some people are lactose, So people have different reactions to different things that if you don't recognize that mold's not a selling feature is what it comes down to, but people try to say, well, it's not bothering me, it shouldn't bother you, and that's not the case. There's plenty of foods in a typical supermarket that would have an adverse health effect on people if they consume them, if they were allergic to them, and you come across that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, quite frankly, you ever in a transaction, someone's like, they find mold, the seller's like, no, we didn't, because it really falls them. Because they caused the problem because they had a moisture issue they were not really managing.
Or they just didn't know about it. As not going in your crawl space, not going up in the attic all the time.
That's true. I will tell you this, I've had some people who blame mold for things. They've lived in a home for a while and they want to get a mold evaluation done and testing done. One of the first things I ask them is, how long have you been there? Oh, I've been there 10 years. Okay. When did you start getting sick? Oh, I got sick. This come up 3 months ago, 4 months ago. I'm like, what changed? What happened 5 months ago? What did you do? Oh, I renovated. Oh, you did? What did you do? And you find out that perhaps there's a building material that they added that is off-gassing that's actually getting them ill. It's not so much as mold. Or sometimes it actually is mold because they renovated and there's now a water leak behind a wall they didn't realize something happened. Mm-hmm. They put a nail through I've seen people put a nail through a drain to an extra bathroom. So only when that bathroom is being used do you actually come up with moisture coming out.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. You don't realize it, but people don't use a stud finder. They put a nail, and if the nail is in there, it only comes out periodically, but you go in the wall and you're like, oh, it's not really tight. They pull it out. People are crazy.
That is crazy.
It is, right? Mm-hmm. So just talking about the myths of it is mold is everywhere in a background state. It's going to be there. You know, just like you at Thanksgiving, your dining room is going to be full of carbon dioxide because all your relatives are breathing and consuming oxygen, and their byproduct is carbon dioxide. So, you know, with mold, it is going to be everywhere, but if you actually see it growing, you've actually given that mold a very nice home for it to occur. And mold can be, I've seen pink mold, a yellowish mold, you know, a greenish mold, a black mold, a gray mold, all different colors. I mean, you've seen it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And everybody's like, oh, is that the bad mold?
And it's almost like saying, is that peanut, is that a bad peanut? Is that walnut bad? Yeah, if you're allergic to it, it's bad. Fire Frankenstein, fire bad. Mm-hmm. You know? So I think those are kind of like the common myths of people naming a mold after a color, trying to simplify it and really actually making it more complicated.
Yeah, I think another one is like, does it matter what type of mold it is?
It's good. That's a good point too, because people are like, is that the one that's getting me sick? And it's a matter of, it could be, you know, it could be something you're allergic to. You know, I mean, growing up, I don't remember anyone being allergic to peanut butter.
No.
No.
But the peanuts are grown differently now than they were when we had them. They're genetically modified. So when we were eating peanuts, they were not genetically modified.
Oh my God, I'm eating a super peanut.
Yeah, well, they're not exactly super. They're
Right.
super probably not good for you, but yeah.
Super not good for you.
I think that's why there's more allergies to peanuts. So I think.
It could be.
Yeah.
I mean, circling back to like the type of mold, it very well be that that's the mold you're allergic to. And here's something funny, and I'm sure you don't know this. EPA will tell you that your exposure to indoor air contaminants, where it occurs on an average person, 71% of the time it's from your home, because that's where you live and that's where you're breathing. And often hot or cold weather, your windows are closed, so you're not getting fresh air. So you're basically inhaling the cleaners that you apply, your dryer sheet, the new carpet smell, the fire retardants on things. All these things that you put out there that you're inhaling, it's your indoor air contaminant that your paint. You know, you smell paint, but things can off gas. You open up an old can of paint and it's dry. It wasn't airtight. It was releasing compounds ever so minutely, and you're breathing it in. And with molds, you might have a cladosporium is a very abundant mold spore that's outside. You're going to find it outside. You're going to find it inside because you're bringing it in there. You might find that you're allergic to that because it's growing in your home and you're breathing it more. It's not diluted. Like if you have contamination, there's a saying in our industry that dilution is the solution to pollution. You dilute it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've had people move into a home, and after so many weeks or months, they start getting ill. We find out through a variety of testing that it's focused on, say mold. And they said, why didn't we get sick, after the first week? And I said, because your body was fighting it. It was fighting it. It could handle it, but it got overwhelmed. It was in a prize fight, and you just couldn't take all the punches. That's what it comes down to. I will advise that if anyone has a mold, issue or concern, you should find someone who's reputable. There's only, I think, 11 or 13 states in the country that have mold regulations. So it is very difficult to find someone who's actually licensed. I find licensed people tend to be more competent because there's barriers of entry in getting that license. But when I tell you there's only, a dozen or so states that have regulations, the vast majority of us are living in areas where you're not going to get someone who's professional in that regard, But I'm pitching this to you underhand. If you do have some mold issue or concern, you call someone and they start using the words black mold, toxic mold, black toxic mold, that's not really the professional.
Well, that could be another mold myth is I'm certified and licensed. If they're not in one of those states where that's not offered, then...
You're absolutely right. And to clarify, I have licenses in the states that I work in for the licenses that they offer. Okay, and what that means for me to be licensed, like a plumber or electrician, is I have to have some core competency, and I have a license to do this work. If I do things that are immoral, unethical, whatever, I could lose the license, and that's my livelihood, okay? The states that don't have this licensing, it's a free-for-all, and in lieu of licensing, there's been organizations that have been set up to be like, well, I will certify you in doing this. So it's not really a government entity, it's an entity that you're paying for their certification. And I lock it into being like I am a mold license from the Acme Wile E. Coyote School of Mold. And quite frankly, the vast majority of people that are listening to this are probably in one of those states where that's what you're going to get. And you kind of have to weed out the people, because there are environmental professionals who deal with indoor air quality and have a good background in it because they do other things. I guess my tip would be, if you had a mold issue, I would try to find a company that does more general environmental consulting, not just mold work, because if that's all they do in an unlicensed state, you're going to have a mold problem because they need to put dinner on the table every night.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I hate to end this on a downer like that, but that kind of is the downer aspect of it, you know?
Okay.
All right. Great. It was great talking about this.